Okay, so what I am looking for with these sketches, you guys have all started to create your side views, your top views, your detail sketches. I really want you to also take a look at your models and to start evaluating what the forms are, what the shapes are that you're going to need to do, and to start calling it out. So if we look at primary surfaces here, you know, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, okay, so what is primary and what is a transition? By definition, a transition is where one form blends itself into another. So if I'm to come in here, I'm going to say that there is one of the primary surfaces. And this is what I'm looking for you guys to call out too. So again, primary surface, primary surface, and you're going to break that all out and to see what you need and what you want to get. So again, even if I look at this here, this is a primary surface here, because eventually I have to blend or transition between these. So these are the ones where you're going to start roughing all these different shapes in first. And that's where you want to understand, truly understand, what are the contour lines, what make it up. So if I'm looking at this model, and if a designer gives me this, and my job is to bring it into 3D, what are some of the key elements that I want to take into mind? And this is where, you know, you guys go in and you're going to draw it out. So you can kind of see here that there is a hard highlight that runs all the way along here. Oops, I don't want that one. And goes up into that point. You know, so it's more of a defined hard edge. Here you can kind of see it's a little more rounded off. But what that means to me is if I'm drawing this, I'm going to be looking for a cross section, and I think the cross section is going to be rounded on the bottom. It's going to come up, and there's going to be a hard edge there, and then smooth on the top. And what that's going to do is that's going to translate all the way down through here. So that's what this cross section may look like here. Now, this is probably not correct. It probably is more something like that. But you're going to want to define what those cross sections look like. And you're going to want to call out all the individual design details that you can see. So here I can see that, again, this is going to be a tighter edge, so it's not a full circle in here because there's a highlight. So it's probably going to be something more like this, contoured surface over top, and then there's going to be a round or a radius there. And that's going to have to come in and translate into this spot here where this is kind of carved out a little bit. You know, so what does this cross section look like? And I understand that you guys aren't going to have all of these details, so there's going to be some latitude, but just because of what I know with bikes, this here is more of a cross section that looks like that. But I can see here that from here it starts transitioning, and this is why it's called a transition surface. Not only does it blend things together, but you can see at this point is where that highlight starts. So at this edge and this edge is really where that bar is going to start transforming in order to come up and achieve this shape here. So going through, mapping out all the things that you can do to get the block forms in is what I'm going to expect from you guys to do. It's not as easy as you think, because what I then want you to do is make sure that as you're doing this, you're calling out all the different areas that are going to be, you know, what you're going to do secondary. So understanding here, and it's almost as if you're going to trace over it. Let me rephrase that. It's almost as if in the end you're going to trace over it all, and then it's going to be, okay, so the red is what you're going to model first, because this is going to give you your plan of attack that I'm going to look at, I'll review with you, Evelina will review with you. So I mean, for this, I'm going to literally just come in and say, okay, that is one of my primary surfaces that I'm going to build here. And all the things are going to be red that I'm going to trace over. My next one, my secondary surfaces are going to be blue, let's say, and I'm going to communicate that. So that's going to be in here. And that's what that part is going to basically be, what you're going to focus on modeling in between there. I've got a highlight here that transitions through. So however you want to redline it, however you want to do it, that's fine. But I want to make sure that you're calling it out properly, so that you know, and when I say, what are you going to build first on your model, you can communicate to me and say, I'm going to build this section, this section, this section, this section, this section. I'm going to have all those built before I go in and do these transition surfaces. And what this section looks like is it has a cross section, and the cross section looks like this, whatever it looks like. At this end, and if there's something in between, that's what it looks like. You know, so really use this to break it down. If you were nothing but a CAD modeler, this is what I would expect the industrial designer to give you. Something that really communicates what the form is, what the key elements are, what it's trying to achieve, what the transition surfaces look like. So you may actually see sketches from the designer that are nothing but detail sketches for certain areas. And I saw, who was posting them? Was it Bryce? Give me 1 second here. Oh, Jason. So you can see how Jason has started to kind of map out for his frame what that stuff looks like. This is what most industrial designers would provide to a surface modeler, because they want to make sure the surface modeler doesn't have room for interpretation if they're not giving it to them. So an only way to do that is to really help them to understand those contours and that form. So in this situation, you get some freedom in the sense of you're going to create this sketch, which is going to be beneficial for you to understand the model that you're going to make. So for something like this, you can see that this is getting really sloppy. I apologize. You can see that there are a lot of primary forms that everything's going to be blending into. So I mean, if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I feel like I'm playing Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. So those are your main forms that you're going to create, you know, to blend in between things. Now, you're then going to come back and say, okay, well, how are we going to attack that transition surface, that transition surface, that transition surface in there, even up in here where the things merge and blend together nicely. That's going to be, for this product, that's going to be your next step, is to work out those details and transition them smoothly. That actually, for this, you can see the primary forms are not that hard. They're just going to be basically extrudes or straight lofts with some minor details. But the beauty and the elegance in this model is all those transition surfaces. How this highlight stays sharp all the way down here, but along here it gets fat and then thin. It goes up nicely. Even down up in here where it's all soft and subtle, you can see that it's just organic, wherein down here it's all the hard highlights. So for something like this, understanding exactly what's going on in those forms is going to be extremely important, or else you're never going to achieve the highlights, the shadows, the contours the way you want. So really spending the time to detail it out is really important. And if you're not able to get proper views of it, you might have to take some latitudes, or you're just going to have to really read the form. For example, here, if I read this correctly, the way I'm seeing the highlights, let me just turn that off. I'm going to say that this surface comes down in there like that, and there's actually a scallop in there, I think. So it's not just a tube going into the tube. This potentially wraps around. Oops. I got a little bit more shadow there, so it highlights out. So you can see now, by doing this, it helps me to start understanding, okay, so this is, maybe when I model this, I can either take the approach of doing a series of cross sections to get each one of these contours in it, or perhaps it's something where when I model this, I'm going to sculpt this full tube the way like this. I won't worry about getting that detail in there. I'll do my transitions, but then what I'll do afterwards is I'll create a secondary surface, and what I'll do is I'll come back, I'll trim this tube out so that I basically have a cutout, and then I'm going to go back in and I'm going to fill in a surface and create it to get that shape and form. You know, the nice thing about that is instead of trying to edit a whole bunch of curves to adjust that shape, I can kind of do it with only a fewer curves, so I can adjust that interior section. A whole bunch of different ways of doing it. But by working out this and figuring out your plan of attack, it's going to give you at least a start point of how you might want to model this versus trying to figure out once you dive in. So you want a plan. The plan may go to hell in a handbasket really quick, but you start it with a plan. Before I go on to the next example, questions. No questions? Okay. Now, one of the things too is you can see in this example there are multiple parts, multiple part lines. for what we're going to do, we're going to take the approach of drawing a single multi-body. Or sorry, not single multi-body. We're going to build the overall body, and then we would break it out into its sections afterwards. So we're not going to independently, let me just get in here. We're not going to just simply build this part first. And then go back and build this part second. We're not looking at doing that. That is what we'll learn how to do next year, wherein you would block this in and then this part would get built separately so that you can put your draft and detail in it. Instead, we're going to look at building the entire model and then getting things refined and break them out into the parts. But one of the things is, you know, as we look at this, what parts do we need to worry about, you know, as we dissect this? You know, can we get away with this being all one surface across here? You may want to play with it and try different things, but we know for a fact that you can see and look at it and say, okay, well, hey, I've got one surface that I know is going to be my primary body. Oops. And if I come down here, even though it's a different shape, I'm going to basically do one swept surface. That kind of creates that front face. And you can see that in here, I've put a radius in to match that arc. Now, because we don't have exact dimensions, we'll talk about whether or not, even here, do we want to put that into the one sweep, or do we build that surface? So do we build this surface first? Build it all the way out? Build this surface next? So basically what you've got from a side view is a surface like this, and then you've got a surface like that, and then do we go back and trim it and build a transition surface in between? You know, so again, how do we want to block this in? What's going to be our best method? I want you guys to look at all the different options that you can think of how you might build this. And as we go, we'll talk about advantages, disadvantages of trimming back, or what's called overbuilding your surfaces and then trimming them back, or what's called edge-to-edge surface modeling, which basically means if I build a surface here, then my next curve comes right off of that edge. And it goes along there, versus this method where what I'm going to do is I'll build my surface here, and then I'll trim it back so that I end up with my surface ending there and putting my radius in between. Advantages and disadvantages to that. Same as we look at this, you know, try to take a look and understand what is the complexity of the form. You know, it may be, and this is where we'll get into splines, that for this particular model, you know, this is going to be, and this is what you'll learn with as you build the models. But in order to get this shape here, it may need to be one singular surface that you then have to trim back, because you're going to want to maybe have this be a separate surface in order to get that, I'll call it the apple bevel, I forget the term that they use for it, but to get that acceleration so it drops down and gets that smooth look, because it may vary as you come up here, and then it flattens out here, comes very flat here. So it may be that you can't achieve all of that in one primary surface. So what you'll end up doing is creating this surface as the black part and then creating this as a potential separate surface to fill in.
All right, cool.
Any questions?
So for like the level of the to define what our plan is, do they need to be as tight as the orthographic views that you asked for, or is it something?
So hold on, let me make sure I'm thinking. It can be as, I mean, it's up to you. Basically, I mean, it doesn't have to be, it can be a quick sketch. Like you can see what I'm doing here, where I'm just kind of roughing things in. You know, it could be as sloppy as this, knowing that I have to understand it. Or, sorry, knowing that whatever you do, I have to be able to look at it and say, I understand what you want to do. This is sloppy because the only person who has to understand it is me, which is a bad thing because I'm trying to explain it to you guys. But, you know, look at it like this. You can either, as long as you've got a good idea in your head on what you're doing, and you can visually show it to me, and you can walk me through it, and I can understand it, that I know what is your primary surfaces you're thinking of building, what are your contours on the model that you see, then that's good. Take it as far as you want. But the more effort or the more detail you put into this, the better chances you have of creating a surface or a model that accurately represents it.
Okay, that makes sense.
I know it's kind of wishy-washy explanation on my part, but it's the only way I can describe it. It also, too, it's the age-old thing. The more effort you put into this, the quicker you will be and the more efficient you will be in building your model. Because you're not trying to figure things... You're still going to figure things out on the fly, but you're at least going to have a plan.
Right. Before he explained this, I watched a couple of the videos that he put out. It's actually pretty helpful. Like you can probably look at it and you probably can understand this map a little bit more.
Okay. What videos are you referring to?
At the link Sharon, and there like are 2 tutorial about building the bike.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not probably doing a very good job of describing what I'm trying to say, so my apologies.
No, I understand completely.
But, you'll also find some videos that I've put out there that are specific for individual components and areas. So really try to take a look at those. When you're Googling SolidWorks tutorial or any tutorial, so my wife gets mad at me because when I verbally use Google, I will ask for like 3-sentence long instructions on what I'm looking for. But I usually find what I want. So if you're looking for how do I build a surface that transitions from a pillar to a B pillar in a car, you'll pretty much find one. Okay. Any other questions before I kind of pull up another example? Or do I need to pull up another example? Okay, so let me just do this one quickly because as we talk about, what are some of the things that we're going to do? So some of it is also about, what tools are you going to use that you think you may or may not need. So here you can kind of see that you've got a form. I need black. So you've got a detail in here that comes around, and pretty much that is a swept surface or a groove. So I'm going to say that I don't necessarily need to build that in right off the bat, because I can create this overall shape or this panel primarily first. And then once I get that form done, I can go back and, so that's going to be a secondary approach. So again, I'll get the full shape of the model. And I would break it out and say, okay, well, what do I need? So to get this form here, build the one full surface. And it may be that this contour, it matches exactly everything. So I'm just going to build my surfaces all the way down. So I'm then going to say, well, if this surface follows this and everything perfectly well, so let me just build one giant block for this. So I've got that contoured. I've got that. And then all I'm going to do is, from a side view, I'm going to cut out this bottom portion. So I'm just going to come in and do my cut underneath it, however it looks, to get this negative shape here. So it's not necessarily always about trying to build this surface edge to edge and then to have it go down there. You want to take a look on what is the base form, base shape that I want. So if you look at your model, and if you were to say, well, that looks like the whole front face does that, you know, and the side panel does the exact same thing. Why not just overbuild it and then trim it back? Now, if you're looking at it and that front panel does more of this, and where the side panel then, if you're looking at a section view of the side panel, it came down further like that, but from a side view, it did that. You're going to see that those two surfaces are going to be uniquely different because it's got that rolled in contour. So that's all going to be like different ways of looking at it, or saying, okay, well, this surface looks to be like this surface, just an extension. That's what I kind of want you guys to walk through. You may not get it right, and I don't expect everybody to get perfect, but I want you to make the notes, what your thoughts are, what you see, what you think you might do. Basically, what is your plan of approach? And then Evelina and I will look at it and we'll say, hey, yeah, did you think about, or maybe you might want to take this approach. Or it may be, yeah, awesome, go in, dive in, and after you get into a first few surface builds, you may learn that that's not something that you want to do. So really, like I say, a large part of this phase is for you guys to basically learn and figure out how to create a plan of attack and look at it, you know, to figure out what you would do. Questions?